Let me run you through a few minutes of fabricating a stainless steel pipe cut exhaust. Doesn't matter if you're doing it with stainless steel or mild steel pipe. It's all the same, but I'm going to show you how I set my welder up. I'm going to show you how I cut the pipe, how I work my bench one into the other, just like I did on the world's fastest fat boy. Check that video out. I did it on this 1937 Harley Davidson WR Sons of Speed Racer. But it's all the same whether it's fabrication on a Fat Boy or a Flathead race bike. So follow along. I hope you enjoy this. Okay, so here's how your pipe cut exhaust works. I made a paper template after drawing my wedge out on a piece of pipe. Now I can take this paper template and trace it onto my pipe. So what I'm gonna get is a cut like this. I just trace my template with a Sharpie. And that's gonna be my pie cut. Here goes a pie cut with a 7-inch cutting wheel on an angle grinder. I know a lot of people complain about me not using the guard, but here I go again. For best results on this, I cut myself a little groove, then I continue to work the cutting wheel around that groove, and it kind of guides me and keeps me from going off my angle. And I'm just going to clean up the outside with a sanding disc, or you can do it on a belt sander. You don't have to worry about the inside too much because the weld, when I weld it, is going to vaporize or suck that any material hanging on the inside into the weld. It'll act as a filling material, also will just vaporize itself. So not a big deal to worry about that. Then I mark the narrow side of it, because when I cut, you see how, these two pieces that I cut will line up. You can see the extrusion mark inside the pipe where they line up there. If I weld this way, I have a straight line. And now if I rotate 180 degrees, now I start to get my angle across the top there, and that's how I build my bend. So then on my next piece, instead of putting the seam of my template on the line, I go 180 degrees across and put my seam here. So that's how I build my next piece. There's my two pie cut pieces. I got them clamped together with just a couple of simple spring clamps. That's all the pressure you need to hold them together. You see I got a perfect nice seam there for my TIG weld, no air gap. I'm gonna go ahead and tack this together and then start running my bead. Okay, so there's a little weld run just so you can see how it starts to come. You see how it gets the color. Let me show you my settings on the Miller Dynasty. So I'm in DC TIG welding. TIG high frequency impulse arc start. I got my post flow set. Everything else is for AC. Now on the pulsar, my pulse per second is 2.5 pulses per second. I have my peak amp at 30 amps. And my background amperage, which is my low amp, at 10 amps. So those are my settings that I'm using to do this stainless steel exhaust pipe. I welded on one side. I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over and weld it on the other side. I'm just going to use my clamp to hold it together. No filler rod. This is all just fusion welding. So the thing about pulse welding is you've got to really be able to recognize your puddle and carry it forward. You can set your pulse wherever you want it. I show you where I have it set. You can see the weld that it gives me. You see the end result. I'm not nearly daring to burn through the pipe. I'm getting good penetration, getting great color, great heat affected zone. I mean, just it's really working for me at the settings I have it for this pipe. If you go to thicker pipe, you're probably going to want to increase your frequency and definitely your current. Those settings I showed you on that Miller Dynasty, that's what's working for me here. Here's a couple of 90-degree bends I've welded up. These are pretty tight, about 3/4 to 1 inch radius. They're real tight because I need a tight bend coming off the front head of this bike. So let me show you what I'm going to do here. Okay, let me work you through this pipe. So I'm going to use one of my bends and come right off the front of the head. And I need to turn it back. 90 degrees is going to get me straight out and turn back a little bit, but not enough. And if I go a full 180, it's going to turn me back into the engine too much. I have to add a few pie cuts to this section to get me where I need to be. So now I've already welded to a straight piece of stainless. And that straight piece of stainless is going to come off the head right around here and angle up a little bit. Now the same thing is going to happen on the rear pipe. The rear pipe, I'm going to come out of that head at about 90 degrees, just like this. This isn't angled straight down, it's angled back, so it's going to be 90 degrees and up a little bit. So if I use this one, to give you an example, it would be about like that, which is the upsweep that I'm looking for. And then what I'm going to do is, I've got a collector here. This collector is going to ride like this, and the clutch cable has to go between the two pipes because that's how the clutch is actuated on a 45. So I have to leave that space there for the clutch cable to go between. And then there's a slip fit. So the front pipe is going to ride high, about like this. And the rear pipe is going to ride low, about like this, and slip right into that pipe. And then that's how I'm going to make the exhaust for this thing. And then I'll make a collector that goes on the back of it. But really neat setup. Actually really makes horsepower. Even though the pipes are of unequal length, you get a good heavy constant flow out the exhaust pipes, and the exhaust giving you really great exhaust scavenging for the big cams you're going to run in a race engine, you know, the high duration cams. And it really makes horsepower. This is my rear cylinder header set up and ready for welding. I tacked on the bottom. You can see I got a little bit of problem holding it together on the top, so I'll use this small iron tin clamp. These things are great for doing something like this, and just use it to pull the piece together to hold it until I get tacked on the other side. I usually tack it at 4 points just so it can't distort on me under the heat of welding. There, now I got my gap closed and I'm ready to tack. Okay, so I've got my extension from my rear head pipe into the collector now. You can kind of see how this is going to line up with the head. My clutch cable fits right between the upper and lower pipes. Now I just need to make an extension to go from my bend here into the head. And then I got the rear set. And I'm doing the rear pipe first because this is such a tight bend and such a short space to work in. Up front here I have some room to move around and work and get things sorted out. But in the back here, I don't have a whole lot of room between the exhaust port and the clutch cable. So this is kind of the critical area. I'm gonna set this all up and then work from the rear back to the front on the front pipe. That's a much easier pipe to make. I use heavy steel V-blocks to hold everything in place, hold everything in alignment while I weld. Let me show you what I got so far. I've got the rear header pipe made, and this is a lot of welding just to make one little, you know, what is it, maybe 7-8 inch long section of pipe with the bends, but it's a lot of welding. But I've got that piece made. And then now here's my collector. My collector is going to slip on, and it's going to not really ride upright like that. It's going to actually have to pivot out, because if it rides upright, this pipe from the front can't come in. So this one's going to ride out a little bit, and the front pipe is going to slip in like this and work its way into that head. So I still have some work to do, and then I got to go right around this little generator gear hump. But I'll get around it, and you know, as I do, you'll see. And you can see the pipe has a sweep up from the front to the rear, which gives it a great look. If it was just straight across, it'd look really kind of funny, and it gives it a more aggressive look. So and it gives me room to work this bend in here. I cut this pipe too short, so this is actually gonna, you know, be extended about like this, and that'll give me the room to get this bend into this exhaust port. But like I told you, I had to work from the rear to the front just because this area is so tight and the clutch has to be able to operate. So without getting the rear done first, the front does me no good. Anyhow, I'm ready to move to the front. I'm gonna work on that now. So here's the front header pipe now. It's gonna come out of this head and it's gonna ride, you know, it has to point outward because of this hump on the cam cover. But now what I've got to do is I got to cut back a couple of these pie cuts here and basically line these two things together. So I'm having a little bit of a redo here, and this is kind of the way it goes when making custom exhaust pipes. I originally had this bend coming right off of that exhaust port on the head, and that was giving me a really horizontal front pipe and creating some issues for me with making the connection to the rear pipe. So what I'm doing now is I put a longer straight section in the front head, and what that's going to do is it's going to bring this bend forward and lower, and now allow me a better angle into that rear pipe with that upsweep I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and re-weld this. And I know I told you I cut this section too long. It's 14 inches and it needs to be about 16.5 or 17 inches. But I have a hard time coming in here with getting the correct angle too. So what I'm going to do is cut this in the middle, put a pie cut section in the middle to correct that angle for me. And that's going to lengthen it and allow me to get into this slip fit past this rear header pipe. Here I am set up to weld, and I just want to show you a little trick I use. Sometimes I use a piece of TIG filler rod or a real thin straight edge or a feeler gauge to shim my parts. And I use these heavy steel V blocks so that nothing can move. The weight of them allows, you know, allows me to hold everything in shape. But you can see how I'm angled up off the table on that pipe. So I use things to shim it so I get a really nice fit. It has a little bit of a gap there at the bottom, but once I weld this, I can clamp it from the other side and pull that gap down. But I shim everything so that it stays in alignment and allows me to get a really nice fit when I weld. Here's the extension I just welded on the front exhaust header. You can see how it brings this curve forward and down now and gives me the upsweep on that pipe I'm really looking for visually, and also to make this angle. I gotta cut in past this pipe here. If you see how I'm out of alignment from the top, I got to cut in past this pipe, but you have to stay in close and be able to swing this kicker without hitting anything. And I also need to be able to move this clutch release mechanism in and out and get my clutch disengagement. So I'm working in tight spaces here, but you can get a general idea of how this pipe is going to look when it's done. Here's the front pipe with the extension. Here's the collector. And I think you can see how I'm working this here. You know, I'm way out of alignment from top to bottom, but I have to be, like I mentioned, because of my clutch release. I need this throw on my clutch release here. So this pipe has to stay in, otherwise I would just bring it out. But I have to keep this inward. And this can't go in any further because it's almost up against on the rear header pipe. So now I can just pie cut a couple pieces of stainless pipe in here, bring these two together, and this whole front half of this pipe is done. There's my missing link. I'm going to go ahead and mark this, weld it all in, and put my spring tension connectors on. Set up and ready to weld on the clutch welding table. All right, I'm down to my last weld here. Just gonna weld this little section together. I'll go ahead and mark it, weld it up. Then all I have to really do is make the mounts, do the final welding on this collector. It feels good to be wrapping up here. I just got to weld this joint here from where the collector connects to the step up for the tail section. I got my rear mount on the tail section clamped on good with the Ironton ratchet clamp. So now I'm gonna go ahead and TIG weld that. I'm ready to put my springs on and I'm done. All right, so the exhaust pressure from inside the pipes when the engine's running will blow the slip fit right apart. So I use these stainless steel exhaust springs to hold everything together. You know, there's a mount to the transmission and a mount to the frame, but I also use these springs to hold together so it doesn't try and blow itself apart and stress out all these welds and all the bends, because that's what will happen here. Here's the finished product on the exhaust. You can see, like I mentioned to you when I was describing how I was going to assemble it, it's got that upsweep that kind of gives it a great look, but it also just really helps in lining up the front and rear headers into the collector. You can see how my collector allows that clutch cable to go right between the middle there without having any interference. I mean, the exhaust scavenging you're going to get out of something like this is truly amazing. I know, because it works on my WR. So this is going on another WR. This is not going to stay on this motorcycle. This motorcycle has a more traditional exhaust, but I just use it to mock the pipe up. So as soon as we get to Tennessee in about a month and have our races, I'm going to shoot some video of this pipe on the WR that's going to go on and let you hear it. And I think you'll love the sound.